Hello, hello. We're not starting yet, but is anyone seeing me for the first time? A couple people? A few people?
Probably live, yeah.
Live. Good distinction. So I'm very grateful to be here. So did you know I have another website?
And you the freedom of mind.
Yes, freedomfromundueinfluence.org. It's a nonprofit. I did my study on that one. So I promised Ken I would wait. He's just calling people. Anyone have any questions ahead of time that you want to make sure that I answer before I start? This is to reward you for being on time. No? No questions? Yes?
My question is whether this is going to be available, whether we need to take lots of notes, or is it going to be available?
It's not going to be available. But I've used some of the same slides on things that are up already. I'm not planning to put this up, but you never know. So I like to record myself. I figure
Why not?
I may not be here tomorrow, so why not leave everything behind that I can, all the breadcrumbs.
That's wise.
I will say that I'm 65 now, and when I first got out of the Moonies, I didn't think I would be alive even 1 year after. And then another year happened, and another year.
What age
Couldn't.
did you get out? Young.
Just before my 22nd birthday. But I honestly, if you asked me back then, can you imagine being 65? It would be like, no way. I would not be around that long.
Can you explain why you thought you wouldn't be alive?
I thought I'd be assassinated,
Oh, right, okay.
honestly,
Yeah.
because I was directly threatened by my former cult, the Moonies.
But it emphasized how dangerous groups are. Wait, that's just
Especially that one and what I knew.
But all of us. I mean, when you come to the fact they are dangerous anyway, I mean, once you are those.
Well, the Moonies just happen to have gun factories and organized crime connections with the Yakuza, who like to do all kinds of sword things with people. Okay, so I think I'm going to begin. Is that okay with everybody? This is the formal beginning. So welcome to this incredible conference in Manchester, England, and thanks to ICSA and to InfoSect, and thanks for coming. So I am going to be talking about the Influence Continue, the BITE model, but lots of other relevant things. And it was originally a 45-minute presentation, and Michael Langoni said the other person canceled. Do I want the 90 minutes? And of course I said absolutely. So what I'm thinking is we'll do about 45 minutes, we'll take a 5-minute bathroom break, and then I'll come back. And believe me, I have more slides and lots more things to talk about if you want to, and if you had enough of me, there'll be other interesting things for you to catch up on. I wanted to start with an important slide. This is for the mental health professionals of the world. This is from the American Psychiatric Association Diagnostic Statistical Manual. And this phenomenon of dissociative disorders not otherwise specified describes coercive persuasion. I will read. Individuals who have been subjected to intense coercive persuasion, for example, brainwashing, thought reform, indoctrination while captive, torture, long-term political imprisonment, recruitment by sects/cults, or by terror organizations, may present with prolonged changes in or conscious questioning of their identity. So The Moonies and Scientology and many other cults have said for a long time to its members, like, there's no science to brainwashing and mind control. It's not real. It's a myth made up by detractors. And this has been in the American Psychiatric Association for many, many years. I believe it was DSM-3, then 4, and now it's 5. I should also say that in my professional opinion, and I think that the clinicians, especially the clinicians in the room who are former members, would say that most mental health professionals are not trained to work with this population, and they have a tendency to misdiagnose people terribly, whether they say the person is psychotic, schizoaffective, bipolar, borderline. There's all kinds of catchphrases and diagnoses, but the intake does not include an in-depth history that explores for destructive mind control experiences and effects. And in fact, I have a very important video up on my freedomofmind.com website of a woman who had been in a Bible cult, the Boston Church of Christ, for 13 years, exited and spent 11 years misdiagnosed, medicated, with self-harming and suicidal, severe suicide, including being in a coma over the years. And she read Combating Cult Mind Control, contacted me and said, "You mentioned my former group, and I'm wondering if you can help me." And I said, "Let me talk to your psychiatrist," who said, "I don't know, she's the most functional and least functional client I've ever had in 30 years. If you can help her, please try." And she came to Boston, and I did a very intensive 24 hours of work with her over 5 days, and that's what I found works the best. 3 hours in the morning, hour and a half lunch, 3 hours in the afternoon, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Wednesdays off. And she got off all of her medication and never had self-harming issues or suicidal gestures again, went on to get her doctorate. She came to a Judith Herman course that I was teaching, begged me to come and speak and talk about to the clinicians who were being trained what they did wrong with her and what they could have done with her. And so the video is up and her face is blurred, but for mental health professionals, she's given permission for training purposes for me to give the password to the non-blur for training purposes. It's really worth looking at. This is a key concept, the dual identity, right? So dissociative disorder, right? You're separated from yourself. I went from Steve Hassan, son of Milton and Estelle Hassan, to Steve Hassan, son of Sun Myung Moon and Hak Jahan, the true parents of the universe. And it's this flip that keeps happening that's very critical for people to understand. So I just threw in a few topical slides of extremist cults, and in the news in the US and around the world, there are these questions of people are coming back from ISIS, what do we do with them? And how do we know they're not a threat? It's like they need psychoeducation and they need specialized intervention, and then they can be functional, and then they won't be a threat, in my professional opinion. But governments around the world still have not understood brainwashing and mind control. So the other big field, and I don't know who was in the Robin Boyle lecture on, oh hi Robin, great talk about Nexium, the cult leader Keith Raniere, I have a slide on him later, was convicted of sex trafficking. This creep has a book on Amazon on how to be a pimp and how to brainwash the hose, that's his terminology. And so these people are teaching other people how to victimize. In other words, how to start a cult, a sex cult. So a 6-week trial just ended in New York. He was convicted on all 7 counts. Yes! And hopefully he'll be in jail for the rest of his life. And hopefully, and I know at least 3 documentaries that are being made about this particular cult that hopefully will be educational for the rest of the world. There was a billionaire heiress, Claire and Sarah Bronfman in it, Allison Mack, the actress in it. They were branding women by their genitals with a cauterizing pen with no anesthesia, and he was found guilty. When I was first approached about trafficking, I said, well, I work with people in the Children of God, and he had his women be happy hookers for Jesus and was encouraging molestation of children in that cult. He was a pedophile, he's dead. But I have a theory, as yet unproven, that people would run away from this cult, be homeless, they didn't have education, they'd picked up by pimps, and then they would teach the pimps how it was done in the cult. So a lot of pimps are using religious themes in their indoctrination. So this is what used to be 43 years ago when I got out of the Moonies, the $64,000 question. Now it's a $2 million question at least, maybe $4 million. But how would anyone know if they were under mind control?
See the dual identity.
Right, but I mean, when I was in the Moonies, I didn't believe I was brainwashed or mind controlled, right? And my family told me I was brainwashed. They told me I was in a cult, but I thought they were brainwashed by the communist media, right? And I felt in control. I was lecturing on Fifth Avenue to very high status individuals, recruiting them into the cult. So this is a very important question, and that's partly what I'm going to be talking about today. I will come back. There's actually a formula that I believe is necessary to answer that question adequately for anybody. I asked this question in Combating Cult Mind Control, for those of you who've read it. I don't know if you remember that question, but it's a biggie. So, I don't know if you're aware, but I've been involved with a forensic think tank at Harvard Medical School for the last 3 years called the Program in Psychiatry and the Law. And I go every Wednesday. The meetings are 11 to 12. Attorney Doug Brooks, who's helped victims of MLMs, came and gave a talk for us. And I've invited Marcy Hamilton came and gave a talk for us. But I've been educating the psychiatrists and psychologists and attorneys about undue influence with the espoused agenda that I want to influence them to help me change the legal system's understanding of mind control and update it. So it's been a very interesting process, and one of my mentors, Thomas Gutile, is actually the international expert on testamentary capacity, which is the primary application of undue influence, legal status, and that has to do with wills and testaments and somebody being taken over by a caregiver and giving all their money and property to the caregiver rather than their rightful heirs. And he actually told me about a case where a lawyer hired him to evaluate a young Mooney, the guy who was in the same cult that I was in, who had gotten a big inheritance from, I think, a grandparent, and the lawyer was hoping to have him be an expert witness to say that he was not of his right mind to give these millions of dollars to the cult. But he basically said, this is a quote, aside from some funky stuff with his abstract reasoning, I told the lawyer I couldn't feel comfortable testifying that he was incapable of making his own decisions. And it speaks to such low bar and a low structure of the legal system for measuring competency. So what week is it? What's your name? And no awareness about undue influence as a process of what it is, etc. I'm going to be presenting in a couple of weeks in Rome at a very prestigious organization called the International Academy for Law and Mental Health. And I had the opportunity to speak in Prague at their last Congress and presented the material that's in here. I'm presenting in 2 weeks a forensic, a proposal for a new model for evaluating forensically undue influence. And it's my friend and colleague and mentor, Alan Shefflin, emeritus professor at Santa Clara Law School, who wrote a model called the social influence model, where he's proposing that an expert can evaluate the influencee's vulnerabilities, unique whether they're situational vulnerabilities or personality vulnerabilities, trauma, hypnotizability, perhaps, the predator or the predatory organization. And by the way, this was published in ICSA, and I have on my website, in my blog, if you look for Shefflin, S-C-H-E-F-L-I-N, you can see a video of Alan and I giving a talk at an ICSA in Montreal, and also a link to the article itself. It's a really well-written article. I highly recommend it. But within the methods of influencing of the predator to the target or the influencee, Lifton and Singer's model and the bite model are to be, I believe, helpful tools for an expert to evaluate. How many people have seen my influence continuum? Not that many, a few. So, and I should say in my Releasing the Bonds and Freedom of Mind, I talked about 10 different errant beliefs people have, like nothing is mind control, or everything is mind control, etc. But this is a model that I am finding is very useful for people to organize their thinking around due influence, or ethical influence, and undue influence. And that it's a continuum or a spectrum. It's not black and white, all or nothing, but there can be gradations. But themes like respecting the person's unique self, right? And their freedom to have informed consent if they're going to get involved with an organization, to know what in advance, who they are, what they believe, and what's going to happen to them before they're pressured into a commitment. And asked to sign an NDA ahead of the process, where honors conscience, love, like real love, like Mooney love and cult love is conditional love. Like, we'll love you if you do what we tell you to do, but it's not real love. It's more like this praise and love bombing. Artificial stuff. And we organize this spectrum with, as you can see, into individuals, leaders, and organizations, just thematically. And trust me, this can be improved. I'm counting on you guys to improve what I'm presenting today. But, you know, most predators are narcissistic, psychopathological, malignant narcissists. They're elitist, grandiose, they're secretive, deceptive. They want loyalty and obedience above all else. Sounds familiar?
Yes, it does.
Authoritarian structure, ends justify the means, preserve their own power. Again, thematically, does this make sense? So what I do with my prep meetings with families who ask for my help to help a loved one in a cult is I first do a 2-day prep with the family and friends, and I create an ethical group, a network, who's committed to helping the person who's in trouble by a campaign of ethical influence designed to get them to be in touch with their own thoughts, their own feelings, their own experiences, to start reality testing, to get them back in touch with their real self that's being suppressed by the cult self. This influence process wants to create a cloned self that's in the image of the cult leader or the pimp or the totalist terrorist group. Does that make sense? Because I have an operating thesis, and you know, we're still early in getting scientific testing to bear everything out, but I have a thesis that people are born with the desire to be free. Like people want love, the real thing. They don't like to be suffocated, they don't like to be exploited. Deep down inside, there's dissonance between their core self that's in their DNA. So people will leave cults, even if they're born in it, even if they're isolated. Some people just can't get out early enough and they run away, even at 10, 11, 13, 15, whatever. And that as much as there's brainwashing and mind control used on them, the spirit wants to be free. The core self wants to be free. So that's an operating belief that I have. It's idealistic, but it is what I believe. Any questions about this slide before I go on? Yes.
I have a question about people want to be free.
Yes.
I've noticed also there's this compelling nature of cult life where it can feel fun at first or exciting, or it can feel safe to know that there are bounds and rules.
Yes.
And there is something compelling about being in the cult.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not
I
to
agree
say
with
that-
all that, all the
Yeah, not
above.
to say that it's a pleasant
Mhm.
experience. Could you speak a bit about that?
Sure.
How that conflicts?
Sure, and I want to, I don't know if Yuval Leor is in the room, but he has a doctoral dissertation. He's writing a book on fervor and awe, about emotional states that he thinks are central to the mind control allure of predators and predatory organizations. And I think this is a very important piece of that effect. So I'll qualify in my experience, there are real differences between people who are born in a destructive cult versus people like myself who was recruited at age 19, where I had a life, I had values, I had friends, I had purpose and meaning, etc. So I had a reference point at the point that I had the intervention that was done with me. But I also want to talk about for a second developmental psychology and healthy family systems versus dysfunctional family systems. And I believe, based on my mental health training and learning about developmental psychology, that parenting, healthy parenting, that side of the influence continuum, recognizes the unique nature of each child and the need to parent each child differently according to their nature. And where at the beginning of their child's life, you have to make all the decisions and be a total control freak to make sure they're safe and getting food and sleep, etc., etc., but that you know that the goal is to adjust your parenting strategies, styles, and beliefs to help them grow up to become an adult and what's called individuate and have their own life. Whereas the dysfunctional side is, and which includes corporal punishment. I have a slide later about a very important book on the destructive impact of corporal punishment on the brain. I'll just say, write down stoplegalchildabuse.com is the website for the book that I'm going to show later. But in unhealthy families, it's like, do what I say or else I'll beat the crap out of you to the kids. And you're going to be like me, you're going to be a lawyer, or you're going to be like me, you're going to stay in this religion that we raised you in because it's the one true church or whatever. And so those are a few points I wanted to make. I also have done work with people on the autism spectrum who are atypical neurologically, and they have trouble reading social cues, they have a high degree of anxiety in social situations, and they love cults because they're set, prescribed rules and instant friends that in the cases that I've done with people on the spectrum, one of the keys was realizing the people aren't their real friends, and that it's conditional affection based on being an obedient slave, and pointing out. Basically, in my experience, destructive cults suck. They don't produce what they promise. In the beginning, it's what the honeymoon phase, where people are projecting love to the leader, and oh my goodness, there's hope. You know, there's a solution to all of this, whether the aliens are going to come down in a spaceship and take you away, or Jesus is going to come and everything's going to be wiped clean. There's some narrative of, you know, we've got the magic wand, just stick with us and you'll be okay. But it's false. And what happens in a destructive cult, and I'll get into the Lifton, Singer, and Bite model in a second, is that you're constantly being shaped by membership in the destructive cult. And I'm going to be political for a moment. I'm going to quote the former FBI director, James Comey, who said the following, and it's one of the most beautiful expressions of what's known as cognitive dissonance theory, which I'm going to get into in a minute. Thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and our desire as human beings to want to be congruent between our beliefs, our feelings, and our behaviors. He said, when you're sitting in a room and the guy at the head of the table is lying, and you're sitting there going, that's a lie, that's another lie, that's another lie, that's another lie. But you don't call him on it, you don't say anything, and you don't get up and walk out. He said it bends your soul. And I was like, he really got it. He knows what he's talking about. You're in an environment and you're like, this isn't right, but you suppress it. This, and you get shaped into this cloned identity that's on the surface. And you are taught thought stopping, emotion blocking, all these different techniques to be a good member, but it really bends your soul. That's my answer. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. Ask me more questions. So this is a very simplistic diagram. I have a much more robust diagram in a book that's coming out October 15th, but I'll save that for the end of the talk. But it's important, especially for therapists, if they're doing an intake, like, where is the person? Are they a public Scientologist who goes for courses every once in a while, or did they sign a billion-year contract for the Sea Org? You know, like, where are they in this thing? And people can move around, you know, be demoted, be promoted. Things may differ from country to country, different leader to leader. But if you're really trying to help people, you want to hone in on their direct experience and the experiences they've had. Any questions about this graphic? Yes, in the back.
Yeah, I was just thinking, it was actually to do with the last slide where you had individuals and then leaders. And what I've seen in some roles is that some of the individuals get kind of promoted. So they're acting in the role as leaders, but they're not leaders. They're kind of in between.
So I don't know if everyone heard that, but you were talking about in individuals, some people would be promoted, and you were asking why or how, what about those people who are being promoted?
Yeah, I just find it interesting that some individuals stay as individuals and a few graduate to the leader role.
See, I don't believe people stay individuals if they're in a destructive mind control in a group. I think they get this pseudo-identity that takes over. But there is an interesting phenomenon of, out of everybody who comes in, certain people become sub-leaders. Like, I became a top American leader in the Moonies. It's like, what about Steve, that he wanted to be like the best person he could be? You could say, oh, He was Jewish, he was raised to be the best person he could be, he was taught to save the world and do tikkun olam and repair the world. There's all kinds of theories about, what happens. There was a very interesting book by Flavel Yakeley called The Discipling Dilemma, where he was doing Myers-Briggs personality inventories. I know that it has a mixed reputation, but that's a 16 personality type, introvert, extrovert, etc. And he found in his study that the people who came into the cult with the most similar type as the cult leader, it was easiest for them to progress, and they had the least dissonance between their, this is my words now, the real self and their cult self. So for example, if you're really super introverted and you're in a cult where you're only going to be rewarded if you get a lot of new members in and you have to go on the street and talk to strangers all the time, like, you're not going to be as successful as someone who's a natural extrovert and has people skills, and etc. Anyway, let's go on. So this is a slide that goes back to the question, how would you know if you're under mind control? And I'm going to take a minute to just say, how many people know about the fundamental attribution error? 1, 2, 3. You better know Ron. Ron's a therapist and has helped endless people get out. So it's probably the single most important principle of social psychology, the fundamental attribution error. 3 big words. It's basically explaining a worldwide phenomenon of a bias. When human beings are trying to understand other human beings, they tend to overestimate the personality or the individual disposition variables, and they underestimate the social, environmental, contextual variables. So why did Steve get in the Moonies? Oh, he was weak, he was stupid, he had a bad family, he didn't have a good religious upbringing. Instead of his girlfriend dumped him, 3 smiling women flirted with him, they lied their face off, and they incrementally spoon-fed him what they thought that he could swallow to get him to an isolated retreat, do sleep deprivation, and on and on. So it's a very important concept, though. And when you listen to people who are not educated about cult mind control, you're always hearing them talk about there was something in them, that person who is, I'm pointing at you, Doug, but it's not you. It's that way. It's something in them that made them weak, that made them susceptible, and is blaming the victim angle versus, we're human beings and we're susceptible to social influence and influence of authority figures. Let's move on. So I couldn't resist. This was the man that I thought was my true parents, both of them. The greatest man in human history, greater than Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, Moses, etc. And this is one of the things that he became so famous for, was lining up thousands of men and women and going, you and you, you and you. And you had 5 minutes to decide if you accepted God's choice. And he would do people had to pay for all the suits and dresses, by the way, they were identical. A lot of people didn't even know each other or even speak the same language, but they were indoctrinated to believe that they were going to have God's choice for their perfect mate, and they would have sinless children. And they worked like dogs for years to get the status to be in one of these blessing ceremonies. And a lot of people don't know that he bought and established the Washington Times, and they still own it to this day, and over $2 billion has been invested in this newspaper in Washington, D.C. Here he was crowned the Messiah in the Senate office building. So, any questions? How could Steve get into such a ridiculous group? So I was lied to, and I was subjected to a systematic psychological and social influence process. That's a good line, by the way. That was Margaret Singer's. A systematic psychological and social influence process. This is just a slide to say there's lots of different, yes, you have a question?
I was just wondering, do you think it's possible for people to be partly in a cult and...
What do you think?
I guess I mean, my daughter has been taken, so to speak, essentially by one man, but it is a man within what
Cult of personality?
he has a cult personality
Mhm.
within a dysfunctional family that is a sort of a family drama cult.
Yeah, there are one-on-one cults, in my opinion. There are micro cults. Right, but your question is?
But my question is about, well, say, thinking of these particular friends who are clearly supportive of them and so on, but I have met, and I'm thinking of this man who said to me, very, very softly, persevere. And I said, I can't quite hear you. He said, persevere.
And this was someone who was involved in the group?
Is he, isn't he? Is what
So I come back to my thesis is that there's a real self and a cult self, and there are definitely people who get to a point where they know the leader isn't who they thought it was, they want to get out, but they don't have the tools to get out, and they flipping back and forth and flipping back and forth. So that's what it's sounding like to me. But back to the slide with the pyramid, there are definitely, in my opinion, people who are fringe members, like people who were initiated in TM. How many people who got the mantra? Nobody? Come on, I'm so disappointed. Anyway, there are lots of people who paid the money, got a mantra TM, but they didn't do all the advanced courses and didn't become celibate and vegetarian and do the hopping on the mattresses thinking that they're flying. But the people at the bottom, when I asked them, so tell me the name of your mantra, they'd freeze and they're like, I can't tell you that. Why not? Because they said I shouldn't. Well, why not? Are you free? What's the mantra? And then if they tell me how old they were and what year they were initiated, I can look up on the internet and tell them what their mantra is, because it was all set up as a system. And my friends who are ex-TMers helped to put up. Yes, there's a question in the back?
You mentioned when you join a cult, if you're similar to the leader, you sort of advance, to aspire to that. In your research, is it, I don't know if the word's easier, but is it that if there's no leaders, and you don't fit into the box, so the leaders are the more...
There are ideological cults that don't have a live leader.
Yeah, but
if that's what you're asking.
If you don't fit into sort of the way the more successful members are, is it easier to exit? Because you never really can go.
Depends.
I just wondered if you...
No, it depends. I mean, there's a lot. I've learned over the decades, I've been doing this work for 43 years now, I've learned to think in terms of complex systems and not think of people as, black and white unipolar beings. And there's a lot of variables that are happening. Part of what went into writing Combating Cult Mind Control was just me interviewing lots of former members and looking for the patterns of what helped people to get out, including when I was doing interventions, what worked, what didn't work, and asking people what helped. And I still cannot predict what is the straw that breaks the camel back, or whatever the term you want to use, that flips on the light switch permanently. But I believe that if I have good rapport and I'm asking the right questions and I show videos and other things, the person will tell me, at least their unconscious will signal to me, that's a good one, that's a good one, and then I go, let's talk about that. And
Steve, on that one just now, you would slot every cult into one of those 5?
No, there's many, I mean, there are individuals who are like cult leaders. There are families that are like mini cults.
So it's fluid.
But what's significant about this is just people tend to think of religious cults when they hear the word cults. They don't think about large group awareness trainings. They don't think about multi-level marketing. They don't think about terrorist groups. And I'm just trying to expand everybody's consciousness that you can have a destructive cult around any theme. Psychological theory cult, psychotherapy.
Would you put Scientology in the pseudo-therapeutic, because it's pretend religious, isn't it? So-
Well, John Atack, who was at the conference and wrote the Piece of Blue Sky, believes that at the upper levels, the secret upper levels, that Hubbard was basically following Aleister Crowley's religious beliefs, and as much as it's aberrant and disgusting, the self-proclaimed beast 666, there's a religious core at the highest levels. The bottom doesn't know about it, but he was a science fiction psychopathological liar.
Would you be ready to come to the European court, Stephen, and say this before?
Am I willing to?
Yes.
Of course.
The court and say.
Well, I'm actually entered a doctoral program at age 64 because the folks at the program in psychiatry and the law said, and I'm in the same program as Christine, who's about to get her doctorate, they said the way the law changes is you have to write peer-reviewed journal articles, and that's what I'm going to show you shortly. I have published my first peer-reviewed journal article, which is available for you to download and read, and it's like Journal of Bioethics and Public Health.
Well, the question.
And then to do expert witness work, they said you should really be a doctor. You know, master's is okay, but doctor, you need to have a doctor. So I'm in a doctoral program and I'm doing quantitative research so that I can have more credibility in courts and legal systems. Yes?
So I just wanted to say there was an interesting book by Alan Navarre recently, which was about science fiction, but it also had Hubbard's relationship higher up, you were talking about Alexander.
Okay, good. All right, let's move on. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Robert J. Lifton. He was one of the original military intelligence people studying Chinese communist brainwashing in the 1950s. It was his book, his seminal book, Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, that was used in my deprogramming. In 1976, following a near-fatal van crash where I fell asleep at the wheel and had a broken leg and was incapacitated and away from the cult, sleeping and eating. And as the ex-Moonies went through all of these giving examples, as much as I was trying to block it, it was really obvious that the Moonies were doing the same stuff as the communists. And then I was kind of then in a quandary because we were God, meaning the Moonies, we were God, they were Satan, because they were godless. But how could we be doing the same brainwashing? You know, that was just before my mind opened up to, it's not religious. And Margaret Singer was an army psychologist studying Chinese communist brainwashing. So the Chinese are still doing re-education programs, everybody, on millions of people. And now they have Big Brother technology that's being employed, surveillance, facial recognition, DNA collection, really scary stuff. And are you familiar with Singer's 6 criteria? She wrote a book with Yanya Lalich called Cults in Our Midst and outlined these 6 things. It's also on my website and in my books. And here we back to cognitive dissonance. So Leon Festinger came up with the cognitive dissonance theory in the 50s. He was studying a UFO cult where the leader prophesied that a spaceship was going to land on a particular mountaintop on a particular date. And when the spaceship didn't arrive, he was surprised that people didn't just, get disillusioned and walk away. And so he came up with this theory that if you get somebody to do an extreme behavior, the mind bends to justify the behavior. and the emotions bend to align with the behavior. And a belief can shift the behavior. So with the Moonies, for example, in my indoctrination, I was a creative writing major in college. Writing poetry was my thing. And they, very early on in my indoctrination, they said, Steve, do you remember the story in the Bible about Abraham being asked to sacrifice the thing he loved the most, his beloved son, Isaac? And I'm like, yeah. Well, what's your Isaac, Steve? And I was like, I don't know. And then they said, well, we think your poetry is your Isaac. Do you love God more than your poetry? Yeah. Well, there's the garbage can. We would like you to go and get all of your original poetry and put it in the garbage. And Steve did it. Except it didn't come out of the garbage after I did it. They took it away and they got rid of it because they didn't want me connected to the real Steve Hassan. They wanted the Moonie. But by doing that, that really got me a lot deeper into, well, I'm really committed now. I just threw out my life work, like 400 poems. Of course, I wasn't sleeping much at that point. So how did I come up with the bite model? Well, it was an evolution, but it was really difficult to explain Lifton's 8 criteria to people. He's, brilliant, ivory tower academician, and I would need to read his book with a dictionary, and it was not easy to explain it. And when I learned cognitive dissonance theory, I thought, wow, that's an interesting way to organize things, thoughts, feelings, behaviors. And I started thinking about influence in those 3 quadrants, and then I thought there's another thing and then I realized it was about information control, both lying to get people in and propagandizing people who are in and making them afraid of critical information, and former members, and I'll get to the slide with all the other variables of information control. So if you have an original copy of Combating, there's the four components, but then a friend of mine who helped me get people out of the Boston Church of Christ, his name is Buddy Martin, said, Steve, he's from Texas, Steve, you can just rearrange the order and you could call it Bite. People would remember it better. And I went, that's a really good idea. Thanks, buddy. So it's been the Bite model ever since. And people go, why the Bite model? Well, because you can remember it better. Chomp, chomp, chomp. Behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. So I probably should have done a second slide of this. If you think about the influence continuum, and you think about controlling behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions in the slides that I'm going to go through, the more a group does it, the more destructive it is. The less it controls BITE, the healthier it is. So I'm proposing in courts, it's an easier method to explain to judges and juries by going through the laundry list of concerning behaviors to spell out these differences. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And it's helped a lot of people exit destructive cults just from reading and thinking about it. And I got an email from an ex-Jehovah's Witness from England who had done a whiteboard animation of the Bite model that's on my website and on my YouTube channel, illustrating the Bite model. And he said, your book helped me get out. I want to produce something that will help others understand it more easily. And it's a beautiful little animation. I don't know if anyone's seen it, but I invite you after this presentation to take a look at it. So to cut to the chase, the single most important thing about behavior control is instilling dependence and obedience, or to quote a certain presidential figure, loyalty, over conscience, over the law, over everything else. But there are all these behavioral things, like sleep deprivation. I was sleeping 3 to 4 hours a night, 7 days a week. And by the way, I was a labor traffic victim. Like, I raised lots of money for this cult, and I wasn't paid, and I didn't have vacation, I didn't have health insurance, and I was a victim of fraud, force, and coercion. Fraud and coercion. So if you could do a retroactive 43 years after you get out, sue the cult, I would have a case, because I almost died. So a lot of groups want to change your name, they want to change your clothing, they want to change what you eat, they want to tell you where you can sleep, who you can associate with, they exploit you financially, they want to occupy your time and your attention. Any questions about this? This is all on my website. Make sense? When I first got out of the Moonies after my deprogramming, I was like, I don't have to ask permission to go to the bathroom. Like, I feel like going to the beach. I don't have to ask permission to my central figure to go to the bathroom. I feel like reading that book over there. And I can choose to read what I want to read. It's pretty amazing. So with information control, I talk about 3 types of deception that are all important, and they relate to the legal system in terms of informed consent or lack of informed consent. So to have informed consent, if somebody is deliberately holding back information, they know that if they give to you that you will exit, it's not kosher, this side of the continuum. If they distort it to make it palatable, that's another deception. And then there's outright lying. So when I was approached by the 3 women flirting with me, they weren't saying, oh, we don't believe in sex, we don't believe in dating, we're just trying to fulfill our recruitment quota for the week. And later when I became a lecturer and a recruiter myself, I was explicitly told, and I know there's a lot of other cults that use the same metaphor, but I was told you can't feed an infant steak, they will choke on it. You have to give them formula, you have to give them what they're ready to swallow as a rationalization for lying to them. Right? So the more destructive the group is, the more they alienate you from former members and critics and critical information. Fake news. Fake news. N theta. That's a Scientology term for fake news. Keeping people so busy they can't think or check things out. A lot of cults use smartphones to text people constantly and track people's location, and etc. And compartmentalization of information. I was fairly high up as an American Moonie, and I was told things that I was explicitly told not to tell the members, and I was told what I should tell the outside world. And it really varied a lot. Healthy groups, it is what it is. They tell you upfront who they are, what they believe, what they want from you. It doesn't change. It doesn't depend on how long you're in. Right? So keep thinking about the internet, the influence continuum. Spying on other people. You know, Hitler had people, children turning in their parents. Chinese, same. Cults, same. Right? Buddying people up. Mormons, mainstream Mormons. So quick quick tangent, I got an email from a man named John DeLynn who wanted to interview me for his podcast, the Mormon Stories podcast. And I was like, cult apologist? Like, what's up with John DeLynn? He sent me his New York Times article about how he was excommunicated by the Mormon Church because he stood up for gay rights and because people were killing themselves, like a lot of people were dying in the Mormon Church because they were gay and they were homophobic. And I listened to his TED Talk, and so I said, I'll do the interview, but do me a favor, read Combating, and then you'll at least know where I'm coming from. And 2 days later, he emailed me, he said, your book is blowing my mind. He said, it's transformative. And 3 days later, he sends me a color-coded bite model to the Mormon Church. Like, here's what they do if you're on missions, the 2-year missionary programs. Here's what, and it's on my website. It was like, can I use that? That's a really good improvement on the bite model because it can be really different in different parts of a cult. Extensive use of propaganda and using information gained within about personal nature against you to manipulate and control you. Any questions about information control?
Yeah, in today's age, rather
Yes.
than when you were in it, surely it's much harder for the cult to restrict information. I would have thought.
So it's harder to restrict information because people could go on the internet and Google the name of the cult and the leader? Yeah. Yes and no. The no part is the phobia programming, which is the E we're going to get to, that make people self-censor and not act on that.
No, the true believer is not gonna.
Right, the true belief. So it's a complex system that keeps evolving, right? Because when the internet first happened, it was the greatest thing for fighting cults. Like I used to have to carry 50 pounds of Xerox things when I was doing a case. We scanned it and put it on the internet. We didn't have to do that anymore. But then groups got on the internet and started doing all kinds of funny business and infiltrating discussion boards and hacking sites. And it's been a game back and forth. Cults these days have the money and the manpower, the technical knowledge to manipulate search engines so you can't find bad stuff about them. Multi-level marketing groups are one of the worst in terms of putting up phony sites with all the key terms that people search for, only it's a recruitment site, as an example. And it's just going to, and what I also will say is that when I was recruited, and I recruited people in 1974, 5, and 6, I was dependent on getting information directly from people about their past, like what would make them tick and how to pitch the group. We had actually, this is dovetail with the bite model. I was taught in the Moonies, their people are thinkers, feelers, doers, or believers when I was recruiting them. So if they were a believer, I would talk prayer and God and the Bible, use that approach. If someone was a feeler, it would be love bombing. Sister, we love you. Come to join the family. We're all together, etc. So there would be a change. But these days, you can go on the dark web and buy information about people.
Yeah.
They can know your profile by the likes you've done on social media, and especially if it's paired to a unique phone number or an address or a social security number that they've hacked and such. So the potential for abuse has never been higher for mass manipulation, especially by governments like Russia, China, Iran, U.S. U.S., yes, definitely U.S. Thought control. So the destructive end of the continuum is the opposite of being open-minded and the scientific method, right? The scientific method, you have a hypothesis and you test it And you're ready to abandon the hypothesis if you come up with a better hypothesis and you have better proof, right? When you're in a mind control group where the influence continuum is negative, you start with the assumption you have the truth, and everything gets filtered based on what confirms that. So you're censoring out everything else. And I like to use the cone image, that when you're on the ethical side of the continuum, as you get older, as you learn more, the more you realize how little you know, the more curious and interesting the world is. But when you're in an ideological totalist mind control cult that has the truth, you start like this, and the longer you're in it, it gets narrower and narrower and narrower. You learn less and less and less, and it's suffocating. So the black and white, all or nothing, good versus evil, the map equals what reality is, the loaded language, the buzzwords that make you stop questioning. Words on the ethical side of the continuum should expand your life, not condense it or make it smaller. Hypnotic techniques I'm going to cover later. How are we doing on time? Yes, I have a few slides on hypnosis because I like teaching about it. It's something that I've studied a lot about. Thought-stopping techniques. So that's a behavior modification technique. It can be used in a therapeutic context on the ethical side of the continuum. If someone's coming in to a therapist and they're depressed, then the therapist might teach them to start monitoring their thoughts and all their negative self-talk. And life stinks, and I'm ugly, and life is hopeless. Teaching them to stop saying the negative things to themselves and say a positive thing, like life is a journey, I'm learning more every day, I'm a good person, life's going to get better. But by thinking that thought, it's, again, the cognitive dissonance effect. Thinking the thought, it changes your feeling and it changes your behavior. So it can be done ethically. Cults use it to turn off any doubts or questions against the leader, the doctrine, or the organization. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? So I'll give you a quick example. My father, God bless him, he read in the newspaper that the Moonies had an M16 gun factory. I was raised Jewish. He thought, now I have the proof. He calls me up. I'm in the Mooney Center. He says, Steve, what kind of Messiah has an M16 gun factory? Right? His intention was to get me to think and to question. But the way he delivered the message, I started immediately doing crush Satan, glory to heaven, peace on earth, glory to heaven, peace on earth, true parents, true parents, true parents. And so he would repeat it louder, and I would repeat it louder in my mind. So by the time I got off the phone, I was convinced Satan had invaded him, and I should block all contact with him because he was taken over by evil. But he was a loving parent trying to wake his kid up. Yes?
What would have been a good way to speak to you?
Great question. Did you hear that question? What would have been a good way? So what would have worked is the following. He would say something like, hey Steve, I need your help. Long silence. Yeah, what's up, Dad? I'm demonstrating the way I would coach him if I could transport myself back in time, 44, 45 years. I need your help. Well, you know the neighbor down the block? Yes. Well, he brought something to my attention, and I don't know whether it's real or isn't real, and I really would like your help to figure out. And then long silence. Then I would really get my motivation up. Okay, well, what was it? Well, there seems to be an article in the newspaper about M16 gun factory. What do you mean M16 gun factory? Long silence. So you understand the silence is what you want people to think, right? One of the biggest errors people make is they're barraging the person in the cult, and they're not asking questions. They're making statements or judgments. So what are you talking about, M16 gun factory? Well, according to this article, the unification movement has an M16 gun factory in Korea. And I would have gone, what? What are you talking about? We don't have an M16 gun factory in Korea. And then he would say, well, I'm relieved to hear that. But how could a newspaper write an article like that? Like, wouldn't your group want to sue them if it's not true? Right? So you'd be like asking the questions, pacing it, da-da-da-da-da.
Yes, but don't you think then comes the process? Well, you feel you might be wrong in some places, and then you also deny it, because it's so huge. All of a sudden.
So it would, if I could be coaching my own parents on how to help Steve, I also would have told them to go to Mooney lectures. Like back then, people were so afraid of being brainwashed. The rule was never go, because you're going to validate the cult and stuff. It's not what I recommend to my clients. I coach them with former members to know what to expect and what kinds of things to point out, right? But you want to have engagement, in my opinion, to help people. But I would have gone to the leader, they would have said, no, we don't have, and then I would have told my father, and then he'd say, well, this is really curious, can I stop by with the paper? And then you can share it with your leader, because I would really like to have an answer to tell the neighbor. Like what is, not that I am questioning it, I'm Milton Hassan, your father is questioning, because you don't want the group to label him as satanic, right? He's just trying to help do good PR for the cult. Does that make sense? So anyway, my father's trying to help. I did thought stopping, made me deeper into the cult, and I didn't have negative thoughts. People said, didn't you doubt? You were in 2.5 years. I didn't doubt, because as soon as something came up, I suppressed it out of consciousness. Once I was out of the group and I started reflecting and remembering specific things, I remembered a lot of disillusioning experiences that I just didn't process because they had been suppressed by my cult identity. And there's no other belief system or church, like if you're in a Bible cult, all other churches are dead and unspiritual and taken over by Satan, you know, like no hope if you leave our group. And emotional control includes making people feel special, you're feeling elite, like you're wonderful, and praised a lot, and that's great for a while, especially in the beginning. But the universal mind control technique is what I call phobia indoctrination. And in trafficking and terrorist groups, it's not just phobias in many cases, but they might kill you or stab you or brand you. So that's a real difference between an irrational fear and a rational fear. But in the mind of someone under mind control, they can't imagine being out of the group happy and fulfilled. They can't. So my personal example, when I was out for 4 years and learning about phobias, I was trying to remember, so how did they get me so afraid of Satan and evil entities? And then I remembered that Moon had rented a theater in Greenwich Village, brought 100 members to watch The Exorcist movie. We were brought up to Tarrytown, and Moon gave a lecture about how God made The Exorcist. This movie is a prophecy of what will happen if you leave the Unification Church. And if you believe he's the greatest spiritual being in human history, 10 times greater than Jesus or Buddha or whatever, and he's telling you The Exorcist is a prophecy of what will happen if you leave, at least I accepted it. Yes?
Yes, even just also Islamist terrorist groups use phobia a lot, just to tell you.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting because I was just talking with the intervention providers coming from the Islamist jihadist organizations, and they have their own phobia. And in fact, when I talked about phobias, they said, gosh, you're giving me another
It's a key.
tattoo, because they have genie, they have other, but
Yes.
they do
Yeah,
not.
so again, if you're in mind control, you can't imagine being away from the group happy and fulfilled. You can only generate negative scenarios. And in my book, Freedom of Mind, in chapter 10, I have 4 pages of the most common phobias I've encountered in my therapeutic experience installed in mind control victims. So you'll be hit by a car, you'll get AIDS, you'll become a drug addict and commit suicide. Different cults have different phobias, but the key is if you're in a mind control group is and I'll get to my study because this is very relevant in a moment. But in chapter 10, I talk about my 3-step phobia intervention to help people wake up, if you haven't read Freedom of Mind. How are we doing on time? What time did I start?
4.
So I went over 45 minutes already.
Yeah.
Can I keep going?
Yes.
Okay. Now we're going to do a little on hypnosis, if it's okay. So this creep was a divorce attorney who was hypnotizing his female clients, sexually abusing them and giving them amnesia to the rape. And he was caught by a victim because her panties were on backwards and there was a wet stain, and she knew that she put her panties on correctly that morning. And she went to the police and they said, tell us what happened. I don't know, I saw my attorney and I know that I put my panties on the right way. They said, we can't help you. And this brave woman put a recorder on in her purse the next time she went to the police and recorded his hypnotic molestation of her. And then the police brought it to the police. They organized a sting. And he had a set of recordings of some 45 women that he had abused, and he kept the recordings as little trophies for himself. And he pled to 12 years. I'm going to skip to this. Only 12 years.
Sad.
Yeah, but he was, one of the victims sued him and was awarded $2 million, something like $2 million. So it was about 4 years after I got out of the group, and I saw a hypnotist doing a trance, and I went, that's really familiar. And because all of the persuasion literature, attitude change, thought reform literature was still missing something really important about mind control. And when I saw this demonstration of trance, I thought back to my experience in the Moonies, where I was not explicitly told that I'm going to be hypnotizing people, but I was told things like, Steve, the eyes are the windows of the soul, and if you really want to connect with somebody's soul, you should look 3 inches into their eyes. And the brother said, like, imagine a point where your fingers intersect in your skull, and you look at that point in somebody's head. So I would be looking through people, and they'd feel really mystical. Like, what? Because it's not normal eye contact, right? It just isn't. And either you avert your gaze and run for the hills, or if you like the person and they're complimenting you, you wind up going into an altered state. You can also stare at a point on the wall or on a flame or recite a mantra over and over. There are different ways of focusing attention. So trance is not sleep, it's a focusing or narrowing of attention. But what's important to know about it is your critical analytic cortex goes offline and things just start flowing in. And when I was, give me one more second, and then when I was being groomed as a leader, I was told to sit in the lecture hall and just pray as the brother was giving the divine principle lectures, and pray that God opens your heart and opens your mind so that you can speak like him. Right? So I would be praying, and then I'd talk like this in the Mooney lecture. Because we want to grow, don't we? And I'm not going to do any more. But it was behavioral modeling. It was how I was taught. It was not explicit. And then if you think about it, if people are in a trance, in a mind control group, in a pseudo self, and you're hanging out with them, and you're hanging out with a group of them, right? Unconsciously, you just start absorbing it. It's not conscious. With things like neuro-linguistic programming and other covert hypnotic techniques, people are now being taught online how to do these techniques, by the way, to seduce people sexually for money. One of the most egregious sites is, I don't know if I should say this because it's being recorded, but he has a motto, if you don't get laid, I don't get paid. He takes MasterCard, Visa, American Express, and Discover cards. Anyway, there's all kinds of hallucinations. So a lot of cults will have you imagine being at the foot of the cross. You're there, and you're hearing the nails being pounded in to Jesus's hands, and people are like, and that's a hypnotic thing, because you're not 2,000 years ago at the feet of the cross, but you feel like you are, right? Because it's vivid and it's intense. Or showing some scenes from Hollywood movies like Armageddon. The World Mission Society Church of God, a Korean apocalyptic cult, likes to show scenes from, with cataclysmic earthquakes and tidal waves and everything before they baptize you on the first night. Getting you to see, if you're not baptized tonight and the end comes, you're toast. With all this demonic imagery and everything else.
What about the time distortion?
Time distortion, so time distortion something fast can slow down, or something that is slow.
Total loss of notion of time, or total
You can be.
absence?
So what I want to bring your mind back to the influence continuum. Trance states are not bad. They're a normal part of the human experience, right? But the question is, are you in control of your own mind? Is the locus of control in here, or is it external locus of control in the cult or in the cult identity? So for example, I'm a really good free throw shooter in basketball. I've been taught to get rid of any distractions, verbal, auditory, trash talk, people walking behind, whatever. I can imagine the rim getting bigger. I can see the ball going out of my hand. I have a one-handed shot. Arcing it over the top and going through. And the really good sports people know how to go into trance. They go in the zone. And they can speed up faster than everybody else. Yes?
You use it for childbirth. When you're having a baby, they teach you how to focus in one place so that you can do that without drugs.
Good point. I actually had the blessing of being asked by a close friend when she was giving birth to be with her. and she asked me to do trance with her in between contractions. And they had a baby monitor on, and the nurses were like, how can you get so relaxed in between the things? She wound up needing a cesarean. I was in the operating room talking with her about walking through the fields of flowers as I'm watching Sam getting born. He's now 34 years old. But,
It's just, does time distortion mean that you are out of time and that it is your pseudo self you refer to? In action, you are not anymore yourself, actually.
So time is a construction, right? We have a clock, and we artificially, parse it out in terms of things. But I'm talking, the subjective thing is that you can spend a week and it will feel like 5 minutes, or you're in a lecture and you hate it and you can't get out fast enough, right? So I mean, it can go both ways. But the key point I'm trying to say here, and I do think it's the future in terms of courts and explaining the science of, because in trance, they've done experiments, for example, where a person would have poison ivy rubbed on their arm, but they're told that it's mint, and they don't break out. And they're told, and they're, likewise they can have mint and told that it's poison ivy and they break out. Like, how is that possible? It's because our mind is really a very powerful organ. And this whole opioid epidemic, I mean, really, in my opinion, hypnosis is one of the best tools for pain control because our brains filter pain. It tells us. And people can be taught to not have migraines by learning to control the dilation of their blood vessels.
But as far as terrorism is concerned, culture can manipulate people too. When they go to martyrdom, it's very difficult for some people.
With the virgins, the 72 virgins, this is all mind control programming.
Yes, it's also
powerful storytelling that is beyond just words. It's experiential. People are having vicarious experiences in trance, right? And so my method of helping people recover from cults is demystifying all of this and explaining it, giving psychoeducation and encouraging people to control their own minds. Like, take back the locus of control of your mind and your experience. Yes?
Do you think if people had like psychoeducation, I think is the word used, before they came in contact with a cult, this would stop the hypnotic process? Or
it wouldn't stop it, but it would prevent people from getting into a lot of bad situations. So the number one vulnerability, in my opinion, is thinking it could never happen to you. Mm-hmm. You're too smart, or you're street savvy. Like, I had bicycle across the country when I was 16, and I worked in my father's hardware store, and my father taught me you can tell if people are lying by their eyes. Like, if they're shifty, they're lying to you. And then I meet these women who were smiling at me, and they were looking me right in the eye and lying their face off. And it went right, they weren't lying, because they weren't shifty. So, but with not a lot of time, you can preventively educate 80% of the people if they have the humility that anybody is vulnerable under the right set of circumstances. Everybody's critical faculties goes down if they're not sleeping 7 to 9 hours a night. Like, how good sleepers are you? Are you sleeping 7 to 9 hours a night? A lot of Americans aren't sleeping properly. They're sleep deprived. They're on their screens, and it's going in their brain. And there's a lot of manipulation going on, not just with Photoshop and phony videos, but I saw a TEDx talk, and it's offline, but I watched it. It was a New Zealand neuroscientist who had done an experiment with subliminal images of smiling, happy things and unhappy things, and having people rate the flashed subliminal images. It's off the internet now. But he was demonstrating that subliminal imagery works on people. But there's no government agencies are monitoring this. Slowly now, oh yeah, people can be radicalized online. Wow, I knew that a long time ago. Yes?
So I just want to say about smart people. My sister runs a business coaching business, and it wasn't until I saw that how much of what she does, which is NLP, is so similar to that. And I wonder if these people know, these clever people, she would call them, or that they're close to being hypnotized through NLP.
I'm sure they don't, or they think that it's good.
Yeah.
Tony Robbins learned NLP, he rebranded it, and he does corporate trainings and sells. If you want to be upset, watch the Netflix documentary, Tony Robbins, I Am Not Your Guru, and you can see his 6-day, 12-hour-a-day workshop where he has all of it, a lot of former members volunteering to help all these people. They paid $5,000, and it's a study in a mind control LGAT, and the title came from his intervention with a woman who was born in the Children of God. And he says to her, I'm not your guru, and by the end of the film, he's offering to mentor her, and she could become a coach under him. It's like really upsetting. Age regression techniques. So I believe when churches and other religious cults tell people to become like children again, they need to be humble and they need to be childlike. When you were a child, you were not thinking analytically, critically, and scientifically. And a lot of the games that the Moonies did and it was like reminiscent of when I was little at camp. Let's sit around the campfire and tell stories and sing This Land Is Your Land and Peter, Paul and Mary songs, Michael row your boat ashore. It brings you back to childhood, easier to program. Revolutionary poetry of Daesh and ISIS. Drugs. Okay, so is it almost over?
Yeah.
Okay, so very quickly, how do you know if you're under mind control? Not this one, not this one, not this one, not that one. Where's my slide? Oh darn. Okay, I don't have the slide that I thought was there. Very briefly, what you need to do, in my opinion, is you need to get away from the group or the influencer. You need a vacation. You need to stop all the practices you learned, the loaded language, the prayers, the meditations, turn off your phone, don't be allowed to be contacted by the group, time out, sleep, eat, exercise. That's step one. Step two is, what's mind control? I say study Lifton, study Singer, and study the bite model and the influence continuum. At least you have the difference between ethical influence and unethical influence, and you have these models. Then you want to deliberately seek out critics and ex-members. You want to give them the benefit of the doubt. What do you got on Moon? Why did you leave? Like Steve, why did you leave the Moon? How could you betray Father Stephen? And listen, and then think about it in terms of the models of mind control, and then honestly reflect on your own experience in the group. Go back to when you first were recruited, in my case. You were the first doubt if you were born into a cult. And answer this question: if I knew then what I know now, would I have joined? Would I have said yes to the 3-day workshop, to the dropping out of college, to the throwing out my poetry? I want my poetry back. What are you talking about? And you go and get the poetry out. Or Moon saying The Exorcist was made by God. Are you nuts? You're crazy. Can you believe this guy thinks that the Exorcist movie is real and that it's what's going to happen to us? This is a cult. He's trying to put phobias in our mind. Let's get out of here. Right? Because you want to get rid of the cult identity, right? You don't want to just flip out. You want to reclaim your mind and your own personal integrity. Because you got in because you didn't understand mind control. You didn't understand what was going on with this group. It was a psychological social influence campaign. And I encourage my clients to have a toolbox so that they can learn to trust themselves, know how to test whether people are trustworthy, to undo triggers. When I first got out of the cult and people would say, "Hey Steve, did you see the moon last night?" I would be triggered back in the cult. I'd see him. You know, I had to say, what did I used to think when someone said, "Did you see the moon last night?" Before I met the Moonies, I'd see the moon, the thing, the satellite that goes around the Earth. I had to reprogram my mind to have the correct association to the word. Then people could say moon, and I think of the moon. Likewise, I needed to recode the cult leader, right? So I needed to take him off the big stage where I'm kneeling, and I needed to shrink him and put him behind bars way before he was convicted and a felon. I had to think of him as Mr. Moon. Right? I had to do these mind control techniques so that it wasn't imposing on me anymore. And by having a toolbox, good therapists will do psychoeducation, and you'll learn about the parallels with other cults, and you'll process your experience and get better. And I think we're running out of time. So be in your body, that's another key thing. If you have a dissociative disorder, you're not in your body, in the here and now. I'm a big fan of massage, and we're done? Okay. Thank you very much, everybody.